Hello, hello, hello. I was haven't streamed in a bit. I was very happy that this computer turned on. Um, my beard is longer than it's been. Let's see, anything else new? Not a whole lot, but welcome one and all. Valpo, you're here. Other people when they show up. To Philosophy Roulette number what is this 242, where I read and review philosophy live on the air for the viewing Twitch audience and later on the YouTubes. Yeah, thank you, Valpo. This is the strongest beard I've ever had in my life, and people keep telling me that they wish I cleaned it up a little. They say I look good, but I'm like, I don't know. I'm gonna cut it off probably tonight, or cut it a lot shorter, like just so I don't need a goatee. I just don't need a goatee, but whatever. So I hope you're doing well. We were hanging with our buddy Aristotle earlier. And I was like, I haven't streamed in a while. I was thinking about doing it earlier, and then I saw Aristotle was online. I was like, we'll go hang out over with Aris. But still, you get the Abe Lincoln? He's not. Oh, I see. Yeah, I do have options. I can grow a beard, so it is a nice option to have to be able to do it. But yeah, so like yeah, it grows. And the fact that I can like almost twirl this mustache now, that is a thing. Like twirlable mustache. Yeah, it was a pretty good stream. It was a pretty good stream. Get talking again about academia. People ask questions about what is the worth of a premium college experience? Like, what are you really getting at like a Harvard or a Yale versus, something with like a less fancy name, but like, the quality of education is usually the same across a lot of universities. You're still getting top tier instruction, and so the question is, what are you buying actually? And what was he talking about that before that? Just a few other things before that, but nothing too crazy. I was wondering when he was going to notice Fabled Vixen was online, and as soon as he did, I was like, okay, it's gone. Stream's over. Going to raid Fabled Vixen, which is usually the right move anyway, I will say. But it's like when's he going to notice is the question. So, anyways, so yeah, I've had some. At least I'm less grumpy. I was still grumpy last time I streamed. At least I'm less grumpy now. Get back to streaming a little bit. I've had some, let's just put it, interesting times. Non-stream appropriate things have been going on, and some good, some very, very bad. So we'll see. I did actually, I don't know if you noticed, but this chat here in, like, down by here, like this thing, this is a little different. So it's not just the screen capture. This is an actual attempt to have like a chat sort of box. So maybe it'll work a little bit better. So yeah, exactly. It's a little too interesting at times. I hope you're doing okay. Yeah. It is a nice box. So it's actually, I think, done by the same people who do the BTT, who do like this, the emotes, like the fancy emotes. So it's those people, and they know what they're doing, and it really looks like. Yeah, I hope you're doing all right. Yeah, weirdly busy week. I mean, you're in academia, so you're probably in between like summer stuff. But which Frog, you look so much hotter. What the fuck? Hey Frog, how you doing? Thank you, I guess. I will say it's too warm. Like, thank you, Bewitched Frog. Yeah, it's just the real problem is it's like physically hot here being summer, and it's like I have to like cut this sides off because I'm overheating, and it's just not good. Yeah. A hot lion. I will take that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah. So, if you guys have any preferences to what to look at today, but I haven't even looked at this. 2 summer courses and you had the first exam yesterday. Yeah, that will get you, won't it? 2 summer courses is it's hot, it's sticky, and no one really wants to like study when it's hot and sticky. It's just not fun. So, yeah, first exams is give the students their bad news. Like, come on, kids, you gotta study, even though you want to go to the beach. You gotta study. If a hot lion could talk, could we understand them? I don't know. I barely understand myself, so I guess maybe yeah, or maybe no. Philosophical questions. Huh, look at this. Did I do something different? All new items in. I need, journal articles, not new books. It's not going to help me any. Parts of space-time. An American Philosophical Quarterly. Let's take a quick look there. Biology and Philosophy to Science, European Journal of Philosophy. Let's take a look. Yeah, I hope you're doing well, Frog. Bewitched Frog. Yeah, I don't know if you're in academia anymore, but like Valpo, got work to do, and all of us got work to do. It's just, it's a weird time, the summer sessions. J. Phil and Pacific Philosophical Goods. Wow, look at all these like top journals putting stuff out. All right, so let's see what we've got from APQ. Oh, do they not have a? Let's see, we've got 203 to 216. I'm trying to remember if APQ is a doubled. Oh no, they're doubled column journal, and so I think it's too long. You got accepted to a master's program. Congratulations. That's amazing. What were you doing? Were you going for like therapy or something? Yeah, 17 pages, single spaced. I'm not dealing with this. Sorry. Yay, that's amazing. Congratulations. Was it a therapy thing, if I remember from a while back? Or, trying to remember. Okay, that was the only one. Yeah. Cool, that's very cool. So, let's see. Yeah, European Journal of Philosophy is probably double things. Brandy B with the 10 bits. Thank you very much. Welcome into the stream, Brandy. I don't recall seeing you here, but thank you. So that's awesome. Let's see, what do we got? This is an early view. Wolf on Duties of Esteem in the Law of Peoples. What is that? It's exciting. Good way to start a stream with like a 10 bits. That's awesome. Thank you. For y'all who are kind of new here, I just generally read stuff and like try to explain it. In the area of like random philosophy stuff. Humour in Nietzsche's Style. That might be fun. Let's see that one. Cool Beans by Charles Boddicker. Please don't be super long. Please don't be super long. Please don't be super long. This is not super long. Oh, it is kind of long. You see how like teeny these words are? But you know what? I want to read this one. This one looks like fun. Humour in Nietzsche's Style. So this is what we'll do for now. And if it kills me, so be it. Okay, so yeah, but the European Journal of Philosophy has very small font comparatively. This is the link for the articles. You guys can grab it if you want. And anyone who comes later, join. It's gonna be, the link's gonna be in the description below if you're watching on YouTube later, or what? You can always type !paper in the chat. What the heck? Did I already have this one? What is going on? Whatever's. Okay, so here we go. And let's do a little bit of an update on here. Okay, fun. Are we gonna work? Nice. Okie dokie. So here we go. And as per usual, feel free to ask questions along the way. It's my first time reading it, so we'll figure out what's going on. This is Humour in Nietzsche's Style by Charles Boddicker, and let's go. Nietzsche is a unique figure in Western philosophy for the importance he places on laughter and humor. He is also unique for his effectively charged style, a style frequently designed to make the reader laugh. In this article, I am primarily concerned with the way in which Nietzsche uses humor, but I will inevitably discuss some of his more theoretical remarks on the topic, as these cannot be neatly separated. One topic I do not discuss in detail is the way Nietzsche uses laughter, especially what he calls higher laughter, as a symbol for the affirmation of life. This is in line with my focus on Nietzsche's humorous style. This article has three main parts. In part one, I look at the way various commentators appeal to Nietzsche's attempt at self-parody in order to give an account of the scope of his critique of morality. So we're going parody to morality. That's interesting. All right. Such commentators argue that Nietzsche engages in self-parody in order to mitigate his own decadence or dogmatism by undermining his claim to philosophical authority. I argue that this account of the scope of Nietzsche's critique is too extreme, and that Nietzsche can accept the charge of decadence and dodge the charge of dogmatism without forfeiting authority. Now, my apologies. Like, every time I'm seeing dodge and, dogmatism, I'm just thinking of Dogecoin, but, that has nothing to do with anything here. But, I'm gonna say, Doge, the charge of dogmatism. Yeah. In part two, I look at the way Nietzsche uses humor and laughter as a critical tool in his polemic against traditional morality. Yeah. The idea that Nietzsche uses humor to combat morality is not new. Hey, Moss Pants, welcome. The idea that Nietzsche uses humor to combat morality is not new, but I hope to develop it in new ways. Doxastic states that are imbued with emotion, like moral and religious beliefs, are recalcitrant. Yeah, I hope everyone's doing well today. Feel free to, chat in the chat, of course. And if you got questions, let me know, but hope Moss Pants, you're doing well. Brandy, you're doing well. Borch Frog, congratulations again. Got accepted to master school in Valpo. You hold it down. All right. We are reluctant to revise them in the face of counter-evidence, and when we do attempt to revise them, we often do so in irrational ways. Furthermore, it can be difficult to bring them under scrutiny at all. They are the kind of beliefs that are often taken for granted as theoretical starting points. Nietzsche uses laughter in order to provide an emotional counterbalance to such beliefs. Laughter dispels reverence in a way that opens up topics previously held to be off-limits for critical scrutiny. I show further how Nietzsche uses humor to supercharge his ad hominem arguments. Okay, well, we're going to have to see about that. Supercharge. Yeah, I want to see what that actually means. Because here's the thing. If you're doing ad hominem, I mean, you're attacking a person and then you're laughing at them. What exactly is going on? Is that really an argument at that point? Or, yeah, it's so exactly what is going on with we're gonna have to see what this even means. What is it to supercharge an ad hominem attack? So we'll see. Nietzsche's ad hominem arguments tend to draw attention to some contingent psychological or socio-political fact about a philosopher in order to undermine their claims to universality or disinterestedness. If philosophers' bold metaphysical theses are expressions of fanciful wish fulfillment, or their claims to legislate values for all humanity mere pretense, then there would be something incongruous and a little amusing about them. Nietzsche jumps on this incongruity and blows it up to massive proportions with wicked and silly humor. He could simply tell us that philosophers' claims to universality or disinterestedness are false, and he does do this. However, convinced of the urgency of his criticisms and our reluctance to revise certain beliefs in the face of argument, he chooses to hammer the point home on an affective level. One aspect of laughter that distinguishes it from other affects is its strong social dimension. In part 3, I show how Nietzsche exploits the social dimension of humor and laughter for his philosophical purposes. Humor is social because it fosters in-groups and out-groups. It is also an expression of shared values. Laughing together is pleasant and offers a feeling of community and intimacy. It indicates that those laughing are like one another in some respect. How does laughter do that, though? That's a question. Why does it indicate this? I've seen this before, but like the question is why and how. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying exactly how does it do that. And this may actually just be a psychological fact, but I don't know. And, there's also like nervous laughter. So, questions of how does like laughter do the in-group and out-group thing. Anyway, continuing. Nietzsche uses humor in order to draw like-minded thinkers out of the woodwork of what he calls slave morality. Nietzsche was increasingly preoccupied with finding and cultivating the right kinds of readers for his works. Given the way in which morality has entrenched itself in the modern psyche, he believes that very few people will be receptive to his criticisms of it. This guy is a doctoral student. Nice pub for him. Yeah, that is very nice for him. But yeah. Just from the style, we'll talk about that in a second once I get to the end of this paragraph. But yeah, it's a good point. Just because there's different things to look for when you've got like an established professor writing and then a younger like academic coming up writing. Okay, continuing. Nevertheless, he recognized that modern human beings, oh man, should maybe tell them they missed an S right there, are the inheritors of both master and slave morality, and that their moral feelings are often ambiguous and pull in different directions. By making the reader laugh at the values of slave morality, values they inevitably hold dear, Nietzsche can make them aware of ambiguities in their feelings that might otherwise pass them by. If they can find these values risible in some respect, perhaps they are not as beholden to them as they thought. In this way, he uses humor in order to identify and foster intimacy with those more sympathetic to his views, to strengthen their beliefs and feelings further in his direction, and to challenge their complacent acceptance of traditional morality. Okay, just a quick note on organization in philosophy journal writing. You see, this whole introductory paragraph turned into a giant index, basically. This is part 1 right here, like from here to here. This is part 1. From here to here. Hey, where'd my line go? Oh, there it is. From here to here, it's like part 2. From like here, yeah. And then from like down here is part 3. This whole thing is a giant index. And they do this because philosophy gets complicated and you need to give people signposts, they say, and things like that. So this whole thing is actually very well organized. You can also see that this is, granted, sometimes like later stage philosophers do this too, but it is almost inevitable in the younger philosophers that they have highly organized papers because, they're trying to conform to like academic standards. And so you can see that they're, it's not really formulaic, but they're really hammering home the clarity of their presentation. And so it's not formulaic, but like they're making special effort to do this. And so this person has done it quite well, actually. I generally hate like just indexes at the beginning, like just do an index. But what they did was they sort of gave a nice mapping out of the whole thing. So this isn't really an introduction. This is basically a roadmap of an introduction. So, and actually it's funny. I don't read the abstracts, but you see what they did. They did it one, like you can see it right here too. Part 1, part 2, it says right there, and part 3. So they did it even in their abstract. And so it's like, it gives them some structure to follow. So this person, I think they've done it well, actually. But it's an interesting, it's not really a crutch, but like it does give some sort of structure in terms of how to give people a way into you need to give people on-ramps when you're doing these sort of complicated papers, because people are not going to know everything about Nietzsche and humor. And so, yeah, nice publication and a nice way to get people into what is happening right here. So, okie doke. Self-parody and the scope problem. All right. So here we go. Cheers, people. A number of commentators have picked up on Nietzsche's injunction to laugh at oneself and his attempts at self-parody and used them to address what some commentators refer to as the scope problem. On the other hand, Nietzsche is obviously a critic of something called morality, and on the other he champions an alternative ideal. For Simon Robertson, the scope problem is a matter of specifying Nietzsche's target in order to limit the scope of his critique so that it does not apply to his own positive ideal. Some commentators on Humour have eschewed Robertson's version of the scope problem by proposing that Nietzsche's self-parody and his injunctions to laugh at oneself imply that he takes his criticisms of morality to apply equally to his own positive ideal. These readings tend towards relativistic interpretations of Nietzsche. Daniel Conway claims, for example, that Nietzsche uses self-parody as a tool to mitigate his own decadence. For Conway, Nietzsche is engaged in the same kind of task as his targets. He goes so far as to claim that the genealogy requires us to identify Nietzsche himself as an ascetic priest. Really? Nietzsche is ascetic? I mean, if you know his life, you know Conway? Hi, Conway. He's a cool cat. Good to know. The ascetic priest plays a key role in what Nietzsche calls the slave revolt in morality. He is responsible for creating a conceptual scheme in which the slavish characteristics of passivity, non-aggression, and abstinence are explained as most valuable, and for persuading even the nobles to accept it. They do this in order to check the noble's unpredictable violence and to achieve a spiritualized form of mastery over the noble and slave. A nice guy. Okay, good to know he's nice. You don't know him well? Alas. Well, there's lots of time. Go make friends. Mastery over noble and slave. Okay, so the ascetic priest is sort of giving structure, but that structure gives them the mastery over everyone. For Conway, Nietzsche too is attempting to effect an evaluative gestalt shift in the manner of the ascetic priest. Conway claims that the early Nietzsche attempted this task naively, while the later Nietzsche did so with self-awareness. Nietzsche came to recognize his own priestly decadence and consequently develops his critique of modernity out of a strategic self-parody, which ensures that these criticisms are self-referential in scope, thus invalidating any claim he might make to the privileged perspective of the physician of culture. Conway always puts this point by saying that Nietzsche's self-parody forfeits the epistemic privilege of the philosophical critic and undermines his various claims to philosophical authority. Nicholas Moore similarly claims that Nietzsche's use of parody, or Nietzsche uses parody, to protect his own positions from charges of dogmatism by subverting the authority of all philosophers, himself included. Sander Gilman takes this thought further to an explicitly paradoxical level by associating parody with what others have called the falsification thesis, namely the view that cognition is necessarily mired in falsification. Drawing on the unpublished work on truth and lie in an extra-moral sense, he claims that Nietzsche turns to his own poetry for the substance of his parody, attempting to strip away everything but the vital appearance that the truth lies outside his grasp, that the ultimate truth is the poetic lie. Okay, just in a general sort of sense, a lot of philosophers, I think Nietzsche also, were arrogant, and they are arrogant, and so when they're critiquing others, a lot of times they're critiquing their previous selves, that they're basically like, I realized this argument was bad and now I want to write against it. But critiquing yourself is like, well, your previous self is a little hard, so you go find someone else and you go be like, this guy said this and I'm going to take him to task for that. And a lot of times it's basically they have realized that their previous thoughts on the matter was wrong, and so now they've sort of evolved and they want to show that they've evolved. And so in some sense, but the really arrogant ones, then they do critique themselves. The ones that really thought they had it right the first time, then they critique themselves because they don't have anyone else that they think was good enough to be critiqued. And I would put Nietzsche into that category. Nietzsche would be one of the ones that would be like, I have to write about myself because no one else was smart enough to have said this to begin with, even though I was wrong in my previous self. So I think that's kind of what these folks are getting at. And you know, a lot of times that's right. Like, that's actually what's happening. And you can see that, I think, clearly in Wittgenstein. Because Wittgenstein goes back and criticizes like his old self, basically, in the philosophical investigations. A lot of that is directed, I think, at the Wittgenstein of the Tractatus. So, and Wittgenstein doesn't really reference other people, and you see that when philosophers don't reference other people, it's usually their previous self that they're critiquing, even though it's like other people deserve credit too. But yeah. These accounts of the scope of Nietzsche's critique are too extreme. Conway recognizes that Nietzsche occasionally does assert his status as a privileged physician of culture, but this is an understatement. Nietzsche makes claims upholding the critical bite of his attack on morality far more often than he parodies the attack. Yeah, see? Okay, so this is interesting. Nietzsche makes claims upholding the critical bite of his attack on morality far more often than he parodies that attack. While Nietzsche certainly recognizes his own decadence and describes part of his own project as aesthetic, he does not mean to thereby forfeit all claims to philosophical authority. Conway's claim that Book 3 of the Genealogy requires us to identify Nietzsche with the ascetic priest gets something right, but it is not entirely correct. In this book, Nietzsche situates his own project within the context of the aesthetic ideal because it is a project driven above all by truthfulness. Nietzsche recognizes that the pursuit of truthfulness at any price is a core moral value, and that his own conditioning in traditional morality was a prerequisite for his ability to call those values into question. Yeah, and see, here we are. You have to talk about yourself because no one else was smart enough. Good job, Nietzsche. Nietzsche sees his own voracious drive for truth as a product of his historical situatedness in late 19th century Europe and his upbringing in traditional morality. Accordingly, he presents himself as an instrument in morality's own self-cancellation. Nevertheless, the fact that Nietzsche's critique was driven by the moral value of truthfulness does not vitiate his own claims to truthfulness or philosophical authority. Rather, Nietzsche's relentless pursuit of truth leads him to question the value of truthfulness, the core of the ascetic ideal. It forces him to ask whether truth is something we really ought to pursue at any price. Thus, Nietzsche locates himself within the scope of his critique of the unconditional value of truthfulness, but he does not take this to undermine the truthfulness of his critique or the authority of his positive ideal. Thus, Nietzsche can accept the charge of decadence without forfeiting authority. Okay, so this is kind of what I was trying to say, what I thought was happening here. It's that Nietzsche is criticizing himself because he thinks of that in some even more grand scheme. And so the fact that he's criticizing himself is that, well, he had to go through that in order to, like, overcome it. And so you get this sort of this happens in other philosophers too. Like I was saying in Wittgenstein, you have to overcome where you were before, and then you end up criticizing your old self. But that doesn't undermine you because you see yourself in some sort of grand scheme in philosophy. And like, oh, now you know better, but that you had to go through the sort of the fire when you were younger, and that will get you somewhere. So this is sort of how people justify their old grandiose selves. Robertson's approach to the scope problem is more promising. In order to address it, he follows, I apologize for saying your name wrong, Montgomery Clark's appeal to Bernard Williams' distinction between a narrow conception of morality and a wider notion of the ethical. Nietzsche attacks morality, which Robertson construes as a system of values and obligations, compliance with which is categorically and universally required. However, this leaves room for Nietzsche to champion a broader ethical ideal that not one everyone ought to pursue. Robertson's preferred conception is quasi-aesthetic perfectionism on which Nietzsche makes constitutive claims about what a higher type is, and how such an individual ought to be. Crucially, these oughts are non-categorical. What a higher type ought to do is determined by their motives. On this reading, Nietzsche criticizes the categoricity and universality of morality and puts forward a different non-categorical ideal that is immune to those criticisms. If this is the case, then Nietzsche need not give up all authority as a philosopher or cultural critic in order to mitigate the charge of dogmatism. If Nietzsche does not claim to legislate universally, then in an important sense, he is not a dogmatist. Okay, but what would his non-categorical thing, like, if it's where are we, motives, if it's motive driven, like, so if you're talking about motives here, yeah, so if you're talking about the motives of, like, somebody, what is a motive? Like, how are you to, like, philosophically evaluate the idea of a motive? I don't know. I mean, you could put those down to sort of Aristotelian virtues. You've got some sort of, like, virtue that, like, drives your motives. But if you've got these motives that are just sort of out there, I don't know, like, are you either imposing on the motives, like, some sort of ethical position, or are you somehow constituting themselves an ethical position? But then how would you cash that out if the motives themselves sort of determine your ethics? But then what are they? Like, how do you how does anyone understand that? So I don't know. Okay, so let's see what now we're getting. So we're finally getting to laughter. So, but we're just saying, okay, Nietzsche has some independent stuff going on here, and how does Nietzsche get in an independent position to talk about this? Yeah, motives are spooky here. Yeah, they're confused. Like, I don't understand. And actually, this may just be an issue not even here, but in Nietzsche more generally. I don't know exactly what his drives and motives come down to. So, but it's in the Lit Review, so yeah. Okay, laughter and slave morality. The evidence that Nietzsche mocks or parodies his own mature positive ideal is thin. Nevertheless, he does frequently encourage laughter and laughter at oneself. Why is this the case? Commentators have noted that Nietzsche takes laughter to play an epistemic function. For Glaser, laughter can play a role in Nietzsche's battle against slave morality. Hey, DeMarshall, what's up? How you doing? Hope all is well over by you. Finally getting back into streaming. I know I've been away for a while, but, like, things have been very complicated. They are still very complicated, but I'm hoping that things are going to at least be more complicated but stable. So I'm going to try to stream a little bit more. But yeah, hope you're all right. We're reading this paper on, Nietzsche and humor, which is a good topic. I like this topic. According to Glaser, the structure of mirth, which is often but not always accompanied by its most characteristic expression, laughter, is uniquely suited to rooting out and exercising the pernicious values of slave morality. He claims that mirth is essentially directed towards a proposition or proclamation that one ceases to take seriously, in the sense that one had but no longer takes it to be true or binding. Thus, it is psychologically impossible to consider a claim to be true or a command to be binding if one also finds it amusing. In order to explain this purported psychological fact, Glaser appeals to Nietzsche's drive psychology. In order to find a claim plausible, certain drives need to be held in check, including, for Glaser, the drive to laugh. When the drive to laugh gains power over these other drives, the result is a bubbling forth of mirth and a lapse in one's doxastic commitment to the proposition one previously held true or binding. For Glaser, it is not enough to consciously disavow traditional morality, because a positive affective orientation towards morality can survive conscious disavowal. It is this positive affective orientation that mirth pinpoints and eradicates. So basically, if you start laughing at stuff, it means that you've given up any hard commitment to it. It's not that you can deny it, because you can deny stuff and be, like, unconscious about it. So, like, this conscious disavowal that they're saying right here is, you can consciously be like, I don't believe that anymore, but you still kind of do. But laughter in terms of mirth, they're saying, is like that's the last thing when you start laughing at something. And that just means you've given it up finally. I'm not sure, like, how do you guys, like, you folks out there, do you think of, like, mirth in terms of, I don't know, like, yes, laughing at something might be an effect of giving it up. I mean, but that seems more like, I don't know if like mirth actually happens at the moment of doing it. It may signal that you've given something up, or it may signal, like I said, this seems just a little bit too specific, because you're claiming that there's this exact thing of mirth when you give up a belief. But like, why does laughter have to completely coincide with that? So maybe it does sometimes, and maybe it does signal that you've given something up. But I mean, we can grant the author this thing for now. I mean, just as a provisional understanding that sometimes this does happen, and that's okay. But it just seems like it's hard to pinpoint the psychology of laughing specifically with this. But that's okay. Okay, and so the author looks like they're going to say something similar. Glazer's formulation gets something right about laughter. Nietzsche certainly does use laughter as a tactic to exercise recalcitrant moral values, but it is too strong. Nietzsche recognizes that drives can group together in coalitions, and furthermore that the drive to laugh can operate hand in hand with other drives in the pursuit of truth. Zarathustra purportedly laughs the truth, and in GS1, Nietzsche says, to laugh at oneself as one would have to laugh in order to laugh out the whole truth. To do that, even the best so far lacked sufficient sense for truth. Okay, Zarathustra on higher men, emphasis in the original. Okay, so you're basically, the best so far lacked sufficient sense for truth because you're just laughing at it, but they didn't even the best didn't have it. Okay, so you can laugh at the truth sometimes. The higher man, Zarathustra, laughs at truth. I don't know. Nowadays I've just been like, I was laughing at something and someone said to me, it was like, why are you laughing at that? And I realized, I was like, well, you can either laugh or cry nowadays. I'm just going to choose to laugh about a lot of stuff. So it's like, it's the truth but you laugh at it, or it's the truth and I'm not entirely like again, you need to have some sort of understanding of truth, and we're not quite there yet, so let's continue. Nietzsche sometimes suggests that there is something genuinely comic about existence, and that can be fitting to laugh at it. Fair. Thus, it seems that the truth shock me and then make me laugh sometimes. Don't it do that? It does. Thus, it seems then that truth and laughter are not completely opposed. Silly facts are one counterexample to Glazer's formulation. I find it amusing that Charles Darwin thought that hedgehogs used their spines to carry strawberries to their nest, but that does not stop me from believing that the fact is true. The fact is incongruous. Charles Darwin is one of the foremost naturalists in human history, and yet he believed this wild falsehood, which would perhaps be a little amusing even if it were true. It seems we can also find our values amusing. Might stop a friend from stepping on a row of ants on the grounds that the ants' lives are valuable, and so we ought to avoid ending them prematurely. Nevertheless, I might also find it an amusing fact about myself and human beings in general that we often care deeply even about the smallest and most seemingly trivial creatures. This does not stop me from valuing such creatures. Again, there is something incongruous going on, that the ants are cosmically puny, and there's an estimated quadrillion of them on Earth. Nevertheless, people often value their individual lives and think we ought not wantonly end them. Incongruity is not the only reason we might find a claim or command amusing. A claim might also appear amusingly absurd to us, but this would not stop us from taking it to be true. A proposition or command can amuse us for various reasons. Glazer claims that mirth is directed towards a proposition that one ceases to take seriously in the sense that one had but no longer takes it to be true. Although he clearly spells out what he means by taking a proposition seriously, the intuitive force of his point rests on an equivocation. Of course, we cannot simultaneously find a claim amusing and also take it seriously. If to take a claim seriously means not find it amusing. However, it is much less obvious that we cannot find a claim amusing and think that it is true. On the contrary, silly Incongruous and absurd facts abound. Even if Glazer is wrong about the structure of mirth, he is certainly right that we often do laugh at claims that we think are false or commands we think are not binding, and that Nietzsche exploits his fact for philosophical and rhetorical purposes. Alright, I just want to make a quick comment on what's going on over here. There's a bunch of theories of comedy. Incongruity is one of the major ones. Like, what is it to be funny? It is to be incongruous. And then there's also the contradictory theory, which is mentioned somewhere a little lower. But this is the point, is that you've got a bunch of different theories of, these are formal theories. Like, I don't know if this author actually knew what they were doing was actually what's considered, there's like 4 of them. But incongruity is one of the major ones. And so, like, they didn't, like, even though I think they just were taking this sort of, like, as a way of describing stuff, the incongruity theory is of, like, it's well looked at. And so this is sort of setting up a formal argument right here and a way to analyze what's going on. And so this whole incongruous thing, it's like, it's not actually like, this is in some sense in the literature right here. So what mirth here? Sorry, I missed that line. Like, the mirth here, DeMarshall, you worried about like a word or something? Word mirth, like this one here, is it's a specific kind of humor, like finding something funny in a certain way, and they were defining it as laughing at something you no longer take seriously. Yeah, so that's what they were calling mirth, is you're laughing at something you no longer take seriously. You used to take it seriously, but you're laughing at it now because you no longer take it seriously, and you realize in some sense there's a ridiculousness about it. And what's going on here is they're talking about what is ridiculous about it. Is it incongruous, or is it contradictory? And so the author's, starting to break down the kind of humor that they think Nietzsche specifically is pointing out, and this mirth in terms of the epistemic act of deciding you don't find something serious anymore, or you're not taking it seriously anymore, is the specific sort of reason you're laughing at it, and you're like, oh, how silly of my past self for thinking that was important. Okay. Humor is not unique in serving this purpose. Nietzsche engages in a variety of affects in order to divest readers of their slight slavish values. In order to cultivate positive effects towards his preferred ideals, he tries to evoke negative ones towards his targets. One prominent affect is disgust or nausea. Nietzsche is constantly trying to shift his readers' affective stance towards their values and rebalance the scales of their evaluations. In Book 1 of the Genealogy, Nietzsche gives dramatic form to the creation of slave morality out of resentment. He invents a character, Herr Vorwitz und Vergehals, or Mr. Wanton Curiosity and Daredevil, who he sends into the shadowy and stuffy workshop where workers infested with resentment, fabricate ideals. What disgusts Nietzsche most is the deceit involved in the fabrication of slave morality. The workshop stinks of sheer lies. Frustrated by the lack of actual power over their noble oppressors, the slaves recast their powerlessness as a virtue and posit a fantasy revenge enacted by the establishment of the kingdom of God. In short, the slaves are motivated by the same desire for power as their oppressors. Mr. Wanton Curiosity and Daredevil reacts to the spectacle of the workshop with revulsion. As Janaway notes, Nietzsche uses the drama to enact disgust on the reader's behalf. Enough, I can't stand it anymore. Bad air, bad air. Janaway also highlights the way in which Nietzsche transfers the disquiet that he cultivated earlier against the thoughtlessly violent nobles to the slaves. If the nobles' untrammeled pursuit of power revolts, should we not also be revolted, perhaps even more so, by the slaves' covert grasping after it? At root, both value systems share the same basis, a tendency towards power. Yeah, so it's like, you get disgusted by people, like you get, this is very common nowadays, is you say both like the masters and the slaves, like the people, like the rich people and the poor people in our current society, they're all the same. They're all trying to, like, do the same thing. And then you get like the poor people making excuses for the rich people. And it's like, isn't that disgusting? Like all these like super, super wealthy people, they're acting badly. And you get poor people who are just being oppressed basically. But then they're saying, well, the rich people, like, that's good. We want that because like we're going to be rich one day and we want to be able to act like those rich people do. But I mean, either like sort of disgusting. It's like, why would you want to have a crappy society where you're like stepping on people? That's bad. Okay, in this way, Nietzsche subtly manipulates his readers' affects in order to bring about a desired effect, namely a loosening of the ties that bind them to slave morality. As Alfano notes, Nietzsche takes certain doxastic states to have a kind of staying power or recalcitrance. Particularly problematic are beliefs that are imbued with emotion or thick beliefs like those of religion and morality. They have staying power because we are loath to revise them in the face of counter-evidence. When we do revise them, we often do so in irrational ways. Furthermore, it can be difficult to bring them under one's critical radar at all. They are the kinds of beliefs that are generally not up for serious discussion. When Nietzsche encourages laughter at thick beliefs or systems of beliefs, he hopes to send a shock wave through our default affective responses and to open up a space in which we can scrutinize such beliefs. Do you really think laughing at people or making them, if you can make them laugh at themselves, then it's funny. But I don't know if laughing at people is going to open up any space for like people believing. That sounds like a time when they're going to double down on you. Like if you start laughing at what someone believes, they are going to double down on what they believe at that point. You'd be like, what are you laughing at me, you freaking jerk? Like that doesn't sound like, you sound like a terrible person. Why would I believe what you believe? You're a jerk. So I mean, if you can get people to laugh at themselves, sure. But like, that's hard. That's real hard. Alright, continuing. Valpo. This is weirdly similar to the Thomas Reed line about mocking skeptics. Oh, I don't remember the last time I saw that, but yeah. Mocking people, it's like, yeah, you can laugh. Man, I don't remember the Thomas Reed line on that. Shoot, but like, yes, like, how do you deal with the skeptic, really? Like, do you just, like, shake your head and walk away? Do you laugh at them? And DeMarshall says, I think it's to show the contradiction which people just don't want to rethink it. Yeah, but see, that's the rationalist response to DeMarshall. And I think that this author wants to talk about, like, laughing is better than just the, like, showing them the irrationality of it. And so this is the question, like, what is more effective? Do you laugh or do you, like, point out the mistake? I don't think it means laughing at people. Oh, okay. See, when Nietzsche encourages laughter at thick beliefs, he's like encouraging the sort of thing that we should maybe just laugh at them in general. He hopes to send a shockwave through our default effective responses. So maybe he's more or less saying, look, we have to be more willing to laugh at things we find important. But again, that's very hard to do. Laughing at the act which people didn't invent, they just inherited. Yeah, but see, that's the thing. People inherit their religion for the most part. Is it like so shocking that most people like have the religion of their parents? It's like, it's very, like, this is hard stuff to fight. Yeah, thick beliefs, exactly. Aristotle should be proud. He should write about thick beliefs, I think. Yeah, that was the best idea I've had all day. Aristotle should write about thick beliefs. I'll have to point that out to him. Okay, so let's see where we're going, though. A rich vein of Nietzschean humor can be found in his frequent use of ad hominem arguments. I swear that exact same sentence you said pissed people off. People get pissed off. Easy peasy. A rich vein of Nietzschean humor can be found in his frequent use of ad hominem arguments. Nietzsche's ad hominem arguments are often charged with humor, whether mocking and playful or cruel and biting. Nietzsche thought of himself as a psychologist, diagnosing the mental states that inevitably give rise to certain philosophical or moral views. He employs the ad hominem as a diagnostic strategy by identifying and attacking the affects, drives, and character of his opponent rather than their arguments as such. The ad hominem is ordinarily considered an informal fallacy and so an unacceptable move in a debate. However, as Robert Solomon points out, ad hominem arguments do not always count as fallacies, and they can provide good grounds for dismissing or at least being suspicious of a person's views. I agree with this, actually, and y'all out there should note this. This is important. Exactly, not all ad hominem. Because if there's someone like claiming to be a moral leader and they're a terrible person, the question is why would you think why wouldn't that undermine their ability to be a moral leader if they're a terrible person, because they don't know what it is to be a moral leader at all. And so if like they're not like walking the walk, why should you listen to the way they talk their talk? So in some cases, ad hominem makes a difference, and it gets even more sophisticated. I'm actually very much on the I think the most obvious ad hominems tend to be not good, but there's a whole slew of other ones that are actually pretty useful and good. So that's something I should get back to at one point myself. Like, what's a good ad hominem argument? Things to do. Okay. And yeah, guys, gals, others, feel free to ask questions. Is a smoker advice to you not to smoke? Well, they would probably know what they're talking about, because like smoking, at least I know, is addictive, and so someone's like, I can't quit and I hate myself. But the question is like someone who like says that like if they're a terrible person, they said don't be like me, then I could believe them, because they're like, well, I hate myself for being a terrible person. But a lot of times the terrible people are not saying don't be like me, they're saying do as I say. And it's like, well, what the hell do you know about it? Like, you know, people do say, don't be like me, but that's usually because they feel remorse. And at that point, the remorse is a good thing. The ones that don't feel remorse, why would you listen to them? Like, at all? They don't have, like, they're not acting in a moral way. And so why would they know morals at that point? Yeah. The main problem with ad hominem arguments is that they can lead one to dismiss a good argument on the basis of its promulgator's flaws. Wow, I've not seen this word in a while. Promulgator. Look at that. However, this need not be the case. For example, when a lawyer attacks a witness on the basis of their moral failings, they do so ad hominem, but these failings can provide good grounds for dismissing the witness's testimony. You never thought you could be reversed like that? Yeah, well, this is getting into the weeds right here, DeMarshall. Like, things get a little complicated at certain spots. This is one of them. That, like, the argumentation doesn't always follow the pattern that, like, a lot of people were taught. And so, this is, like, I like this point. I like what the author is doing here. And so, it's like, I think this is good. Yeah, so these failings can provide good grounds for dismissing the witness testimony. So if they're a liar, maybe they're lying. Not necessarily lying this time, but they do lie in general. So, well, why should you believe them? The same can be true in certain circumstances for philosophical views. According to Solomon, ad hominem arguments can expand rather than limit the field of argument by focusing not just on the soundness of premises and their validity of arguments, but also on the motivations, intentions, and circumstances that give rise to the view under scrutiny. Nietzsche does both of these things, often attacking arguments and their promulgator's character in a single breath. For fields of inquiry in which there are no obvious truths or proofs, subjects like religion and morality, ad hominem arguments can be useful for digging up and attacking the motivations behind certain claims. Humor is well suited to ad hominem argument and can ramp up its effect. For example, Nietzsche often uses hominem to target philosophers' ambitions to transcend their individual psychologies and socioeconomic political circumstances. An effort that Nietzsche sees as woefully misguided and risible in itself. Nietzsche takes advantage of the latent humor in philosophy's pretensions and magnifies it to extreme proportions for a rhetorical effect. Okay, so Nietzsche is basically saying you people are grandiose and I'm going to laugh at you for it. And so, why is that legal in this at this moment? Well, if people are being pretentious, you can laugh at them, and that sort of pokes a hole in their pretension. And so, the fact that you can laugh at their pretension is a charge against them, because yes, you're laughing at the person and not their argument, but it's like you're being pretentious, and like, unless you are like doing so knowingly, like, being pretentious is not inherently bad all the time, but like, if you're getting laughed at and you might deserve to be laughed at, then why should anyone listen to your pretentious, like, just expounding? Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, just laughing at someone for their pretension, it could work. So let's see. He directs one humorous ad hominem at Schopenhauer. And here Nietzsche quotes Schopenhauer, what Schopenhauer calls the proper foundation of ethics, namely his claim, harm no one, rather help everyone to the extent that you can. Nietzsche responds to this with vitriol and playfulness in equal measure. Quoting, anyone who has ever truly felt how inanely false and sentimental this claim is in a world whose essence is will to power, they might recall that Schopenhauer, pessimism notwithstanding, actually played the flute every day after dinner. You can read it in his biography, and just out of curiosity, a pessimist who negates both God and world but stops before morality, who affirms morality and plays his flute, affirms Leiden in morality. Excuse me, is this really a pessimist? Yeah, so saying, why should we listen to Schopenhauer? This guy is just silly. Okay, Nietzsche does not take the time to refute Schopenhauer's claim about the foundation of ethics. Instead, he cruelly dismisses it as inanely false and sentimental. Furthermore, instead of presenting counter-arguments to Schopenhauer's pessimism by probing his claim that the thing in itself is will, or his claim that suffering is intrinsically bad, he questions the sincerity of Schopenhauer's beliefs. Nietzsche paints a comic portrait of the stern philosopher who purportedly found so little value in this world, relaxing after dinner by practicing the flute, presumably beloved Poodle at his side. Nietzsche heightens the pitch of his mockery by adding that Schopenhauer actually played the flute. In fact, he did so every day, and he had the bad sense not to hide this pastime from biographers. Could Schopenhauer really believe that the world was bereft of value if he played the flute and affirmed morality? Indeed, he seems to have found plenty to value. And while Schopenhauer would retort that music and morality have value only in virtue of their capacity to negate the will to life, Nietzsche would respond by pointing out that this seems frankly insincere in light of his behavior. By pointing and laughing at Schopenhauer's personality and interests, he inclines those tempted by Schopenhauer's pessimism to take a distrustful step back from his extreme claims. In Skirmishes 29, Nietzsche mocks Kant's doctrine of transcendental idealism in a miniature dialogue presented as excerpts from a doctoral exam. What is the task of all higher schooling? To turn men into machines. What method is used? They have to learn to be bored. How is this done? Through the concept of duty. Who is the model for this? The philologist. He teaches you how to grind away at your work. Who is the perfect human? The civil servant. What philosophy gives the highest formula for the civil servant? Kant, the civil servant as thing in itself, set to judge over the civil servant as phenomenon. Here, Nietzsche sweeps Kant's rigorous argumentation aside with a few jokes. Kant is a boring civil servant's philosopher. Nietzsche means to draw attention to Kant's motives and circumstances. The forces that gave rise to Kant's thought were at work elsewhere in German society. Nietzsche cast Kant's philosophy in the light of a new capitalist valorization of work as an end in itself and as the mechanization of human beings in an industrial society. These forces brought about the 18th and 19th century man as civil servant, as well as the civil servant's philosopher Kant, who glorified dutiful, boring work-grinding behavior by casting it in, as Nietzsche elsewhere mocks, majestic moral structures. Nietzsche playfully considers the possibility that Kant's philosophy is not a sublimely independent work of his intellect, but rather something that is developed in order to justify the mechanistic, boring, and grinding daily life of the German civil servant. Nietzsche jokingly urges us to examine the social structure and material circumstances under which Kant developed his ideas, something philosophers would not ordinarily be inclined to do. Okay, I don't like Kant, so we're just going to let all of that stand. Nietzsche often launches ad hominem attacks against philosophers and artists on the basis of their nationality. These are often sweeping generalizations about a national culture. However, Nietzsche usually qualifies them to a particular era to particular eras, centuries, or movements of thought. This is not always the case with the Germans, who he often unqualifiedly castigates. When he must praise a German thinker or artist, he will separate them from their Germanness by referring to them as European. The Germans and the English are Nietzsche's favorite ad hominem targets, but the French get few nudges as well. Why was he making fun of people for their nationality? I think maybe this just goes to the Kantianness. He's just thinking of them as cogs in their cultures, cultural cogs. And so they're not actually doing anything. They're just sort of propagating the national culture. And so that's why the European is somehow something bigger. Yeah. Now you're just painting Nietzsche as a lazy philosopher? No, this isn't so easy. Because this was new at the time. I don't think this is a lazy. I don't think Nietzsche was being lazy. I think he was doing something that was you could have done this in a different way. Nietzsche could have done some sort of cultural analysis. So I think this is not a work of a lazy philosopher. This is the work of someone doing something. There's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to make an argument too. And so the point of the author here is that Nietzsche was doing the social critique, which you can do in perfectly legit academic philosophy now, but he's doing it in a different way. Maybe one that you don't like, that he was using humor to sort of poke fun of them at being cogs. But I don't actually think I'd want to call Nietzsche lazy at this point. I mean, maybe other things he gets lazy about, but I think doing social critique in this sort of way is not inherently lazy. I just think it's it was unusual at the time, and maybe even still unusual now, because people still don't think ad hominem is really a legit way to do stuff. Okay. But yeah, keep bringing the questions. It's good. Continuing. For example, Nietzsche often appeals to the Englishness of the utilitarian's more well-known advocates in order to criticize the view. In a more memorable ad hominem, he claims people don't strive for happiness, only the English do. Dismissing the argument like nothing? Yeah, you see, that's a good point. It's not giving the other side enough credit. But let me tell you something. The other side never thinks you give them enough credit. No one ever thinks you give what they believe enough credit. And so, yeah, you're not giving them enough credit, but that's going to happen anyway. And so it's well, how much credit do you want to give them? And at a certain point, you're giving them too much credit. You're giving them a little too much leeway there. The joke here, of course, there's a great quote by a Frenchman that says some Englishman was saying the French was all they were all just fighting for the money, but the English were fighting for their morals. And the Frenchman says, look, we all fight for what we don't have. And so in some sense, this is in that line. People don't strive for happiness, only the English do. It's because they don't know what they're doing. It's because they're just sad people. So this is a funny argument. He's turning the utilitarian sort of thing on them. Okay, continuing. Here Nietzsche mocks the purported universality of the utilitarian claim that all human beings strive for happiness by presenting it as a national idiosyncrasy instead. We see here again Nietzsche's use of ad hominem to reveal the pretentiousness of bold claims to universality and knock them down a peg. Nietzsche anticipates the claim in TI with another, less pithy ad hominem. DeMarshall says, I just mean Russell jokes about philosophers' arguments, but he will kill it too. Yeah, fair, but not everyone has to do stuff the way Russell did. Nietzsche is, allowed to do it this way too. And it's okay, you might like the more formal arguments, but you have to give Nietzsche some credit here. That's kind of what this author is, I think, showing, is that you can also make those arguments, but he's giving the author here is giving example of what could have been given in a longer sort of more formal treatment, but instead Nietzsche's just poking fun at it and sort of getting a similar result. Okay. Ultimately, they all want English morality to be given its dues, since it is best for humanity, for the general utility, or the happiness of the majority. No, the happiness of England. They want with all the strength they can muster to prove themselves that striving for English happiness, I mean for comfort and fashion, and at the highest level for a seat in Parliament. Yeah, so basically they're saying this sort of drive for happiness. Not everyone needs to be happy. You know, my it's sort of a funny thing. My grandma once said to my uncle, "I just want you to be happy." Like, so it's like a mother telling her son, "I just want you to be happy." And my uncle, and she was like, "Why are you so sad?" And he goes, "Ma, you're asking something that's not possible of me." Like, he wasn't a happy person. And so it's like, for a mother to want her son to be happy, he was like, well, that's not possible. Not everybody wants the exact same stuff. He was just sort of like an angry sort of, not angry, but he was like, my uncle is a funny guy. I'm sure wherever you are in the world, you have someone like this. He was sort of the evil civil servant. Like, you would go into like his office and like he would be doing investigations for the state and stuff. And they'd be like, well, you didn't fill out the right form. Go get the right form. And so he's like, in some sense, he would his job would be to do everything by the book so that the state can crush people later when they need to. But like, if you walk in and you've been hurt or something, you'd still have to fill out the right forms. But like, he's not a happy person, or he wasn't, at least when he was younger. So it's like, you have to realize not everyone wants this sort of like entire like this happy morality thing. It's like, well, maybe that's not the way the world is, and maybe that's not how all people are. So yeah, and so while Kant's ethics is the ethics of the civil servant, utilitarianism is the ethics of the parliamentarian. They want to follow the rules, not just be a cog, but they want to follow the rules. And so like, yeah, but is someone who just follows the rules like super happy? Maybe not, and maybe that's not what everyone wants either. What drives it is a desire for comfort, fashion, and herd happiness. See, I don't know where the herd came from. I guess fashion, but like, why is herd? That's interesting. Why did the author just say that right there? In this way, Nietzsche disputes the universal pretensions of Kantian and utilitarian ethics by rooting them in a particular time and place, and by postulating possible motivations for them. A valuation of hard work and drudgery for Kant, and a valuation of comfort and ease for utilitarianism. Nietzsche often jabs at these theories, which purport to be interested in the well-being of everyone, by claiming that they are selfish. Thus, utilitarianism is interested in the happiness of England, and, at least in Nietzsche's eyes, certainly not his own happiness. He makes a similar accusation of selfishness against Kant. What? You admire the categorical imperative within you? This firmness of your so-called moral judgment? This absoluteness of feeling? Here everyone must judge as I do? Rather admire your selfishness here, and the blindness, pettiness, and simplicity of your selfishness. For it is selfish to consider one's own judgment a universal law, and this selfishness is blind, petty, and simple. It's funny, because it's like, this was always the problem with Kant. It's like, how do you follow the rules? No one knows exactly how to do it. And so it's like, Nietzsche's just calling Kant out on this. It's like, you want us to follow the rules the way you follow the rules. We don't know if that's how you follow the rules. No one knows if you do that. So it's like this firmness of your moral judgment. There is no firm moral judgment, because how do you follow the rules? No one knows. Again, Nietzsche cast doubt on philosophers' supposedly disinterested motivations by considering ways in which their philosophies might serve up to prop up their own personal prejudices and nationally rooted values. Humor is a particularly effective tool for cementing Nietzsche's point that traditional morality's claims to universality are mere pretense. Why is this the case? There is already a germ of humor in the possibility that moral philosophers are merely putting on airs when they purport to legislate for all humanity. If this were true, what a monstrous incongruity it would be. Nietzsche could simply deploy sober argumentation in order to show that philosophers' claims to universality are bogus and leave it at that. However, he exploits the nascent humor in his criticism in order to drive the point home. Nietzsche was convinced of the urgency of his critique. He saw traditional morality as deeply inimical to flourishing and culture, and so he throws everything he has at the reader in order to open up their eyes to that danger. Now, why? I'm not he exploits the nascent humor in his criticism. Really, why do we assume there's nascent humor in any criticism, or his particularly? What is the overlap between criticism and humor? I don't know if this author has said it. This may be assumed in Nietzsche, but what is it? And I don't know if anyone's actually ever tried to hammer down what is it to be laughed at? What is it to laugh at something? I don't know. That you can do this is not in question. We know stupid things get laughed at. But what is that? And is it the mirth just giving up of old ideas? Or is there something else to it? I don't think it's just the giving up old ideas you no longer believe. So, that's kind of... I'm not sure. So, but there's the point that there is humor in criticism, I think is right. But what exactly? I don't know. But yeah, so you can make fun of Kant for everyone's overconfident in their own philosophy. Then the overconfidence leads to pretentiousness. And, you can laugh at a person for being overconfident, pretentious. And, eventually the king has no clothes. And the king gets laughed at. So I think that's kind of all of what's going on here. He's just you have no clothes, all of you. You English who think you're talking about universal happiness, you're talking about English happiness. Kant's talking about this, everyone must judge as I do. Well, no one judges as you do. Only you judge as you do, Kant. So, whatever. Nietzsche's ad hominem arguments are not bald character assassination. They have a point and they can direct us toward the truth. They call into question the pretensions of their targets and urge us to adopt a standpoint of suspicion. For Nietzsche's philosophical positions are, as Solomon says, steeped in and constitutive of their character of the person in question. And so Nietzsche attends not only to the arguments, but also to their source, because we cannot assume that philosophical works spring forth entirely independently of the cultural, material, and psychological contingencies that surround their creation. We need to have a look at these things as well. Humor is an effective rhetorical tool in this context because philosophers have traditionally conceived of their work as transcending cultural, material, and psychological contingency. Nietzsche capitalizes on this incongruity and uses humor to blow up the contingent aspects of moral philosophy to grotesque proportions. What Nietzsche offers is a kind of caricature sketch. He zeroes in on some contingent facts about a philosopher and their work, like Schopenhauer's psychological idiosyncrasies, and makes them stick out like exaggerated facial features. At best, Nietzsche's humor can make his point seem almost blindingly obvious, but then of course we must take a closer look. I'm a little bit worried that, we're getting farther away from what Nietzsche is saying and more into what the author wants to tell us at this point. Because again, we're hitting the incongruity theory kind of hard here. And exactly what is it about the humor? We're assuming that this is what it is. Make his point seem blindingly obvious. No. What do I want to see? The fact that you have to look at a time and place, right here, this stuff, that you have to look at the time and place of when things are happening. It's well, why does that matter at all? And it's well, because the philosophers are specifically trying to transcend that. But that's so what? You can say that without laughing. The laughing bit, I think, is showing that the things the other philosophers are saying have no contact with reality in some sense. And so they're just saying something that is not incongruous. It's that their head's in the clouds. And so the laughter, I think, is a grounding feature here. It's you're meant to ground it, at least in some human experience, and there is no human experience. That, I think, is the bigger point. And I'm not sure that that's what I think is going on here. And so I'm not sure that the author is quite like they think they're pointing out that there's some incongruity, but incongruity is just like, okay, but what makes up the incongruity? That the philosopher's head's in clouds, and that the laughter is some sort of physical reaction to something that doesn't work, is sort of like, that is really what is the touch point here. That like there's something physical and grounded about the laughing, and that once you start laughing at the philosophers, then you have done something that you've taken away their ground. And I think that's the thing here. Because just calling it incongruous here, I think, is too theoretical still. I mean, this is not like a super bad criticism of the author at this point, but like this is where I think the argument could have gone, that the laughter is really a grounding mechanism. Okay, continuing. Nietzsche's community of taste. One difference between affects like humor or mirth and other affects that Nietzsche deploys against morality, like disgust, is that humor has a strong social dimension. Disgust does have a social dimension. Things are certainly found disgusting in some cultures that are not found disgusting in others. In ancient cultures especially, we find that the practices and customs of rival groups were deemed disgusting or unclean in order to delineate the bounds of one's own culture and to solidify group identity. Nevertheless, humor's positive affective valence binds people together in ways that disgust does not do quite as effectively. Nietzsche exploits a social dimension for his philosophical purposes. Contemporary philosophers and psychologists working on humor generally recognize that it is a social phenomenon. Humor is, like footnote 6. I wonder what that says. Humor is capable of strengthening social bonds and fostering a sense of community. It creates in-groups and out-groups, those who get the joke and those who do not, those who are the butt of the joke and those doing the joking. Laughter together is pleasant and can indicate shared beliefs, prejudices, and values. It's certainly more pleasant than feeling disgust together. As Alfano notes, because laughter typically arises spontaneously in reaction to eliciting conditions, laughter is a difficult to fake, difficult to stifle expression of what one does and does not value. Yes, this is the spontaneously. What is that? Laughing with other people helps cement shared beliefs and values and to erode confidence in the beliefs and values of the object of laughter. I think we've read this one. It's entirely possible. That would be funny. Why? I wonder when I did this. You know what was funny? Let me see something real quick. Hold on. Wouldn't be the first time I've reread stuff. No. I don't think so, because I'm looking at my downloads folder. No, I don't know. We'll see. It's possible, but we're going to keep going. I wonder when we did it. Let me look at something real fast. When did this come out? Terrence Cuneo. Hi, Cryonics. Sure. Send me a message or something and remind me if you have any things you want me to read. Like, just give me a send me go find it. Just send me like the link to it, and I can put stuff up. Cuneo is good. Okay, good that we have recommendations. I don't think we've read this one just because I would have remembered the ad hominem stuff before. Because I like ad hominem arguments, and I think we read something similar, but I don't know if we read this one. And I can tell you right now that this was off the front page. Like, you know how I do stuff. I go to the front page of stuff. So it's entirely possible that this did come out earlier and I did it earlier this year. Yeah, I don't know. Shoot. We'll see. I don't know. It's cool. Either way. Yeah, I could look it up later, but we're going to get through it this way. Alright, so anyway, Cuneo is good. No. It's a good question. This happened a while ago, actually. There was a paper on grounding, I think. And I read about half of it, and I realized I had read it. like 2 weeks earlier, and I had completely forgotten. And like I was able to find it really quickly. I was like, oh no, I read this. Like, oh shucks, because I don't know where we're going with this paper. So if I remembered, I would be like, I kind of have an idea where we're going, but I don't know where this author is gonna go. So it does happen. You read too much stuff, and you're like, I don't know what's going on anymore. No, bring the questions coming. It's fine. Laughing with other people helps cement shared beliefs and values to erode confidence in the beliefs and values of the object of laughter. Nietzsche takes advantage of the social aspect of laughter in order to draw hypothetical individuals into a community that shares his taste in a broad sense. Nietzsche recognizes with a mixture of anxiety and pride that he is untimely and that few will be receptive to his ideals. He uses humor in order to draw out those more sympathetic to his views, to cement their beliefs further in his direction, and to put strain on the complacent acceptance of morality. Nietzsche is interested in drawing people like himself away from traditional morality, namely people capable of creating great works of culture. Yeah, you know what's interesting, DeMarshall? I think like this sort of like sentence right here, these sorts of sentences right here, these actually are very common to like people writing on Nietzsche. And so they sound very repetitive in some sense. But I don't think we've read this paper, but like this little bit right here does sound like a lot of other things I've read on Nietzsche. In Nietzsche's earliest writings, he endorses the romantic thought that mythology is the core of a genuine culture, and the further thought that a new self-consciously constructed mythology was necessary in the modern world. He thought that Wagner's music dramas could provide the mythic core that would launch a general rebirth of German culture. In The Birth of Tragedy, he charts the rise and fall of Greek tragedy and envisages a reinvigoration of the spirit of the genre in Wagner's music. At his most romantically optimistic, he claims, "Let no one believe that the German spirit has lost its mythical homeland forever when it still clearly understands the voice of the bird that speaks out of that homeland. One day it will awake in the morning freshness from a deep sleep. Then it will kill the dragon, destroy the malicious dwarf, and awaken Brunhilde, and even Wotan's spear will not block its path." His hopes on this score were bitterly dashed. Wagner's inaugural Bayreuth Festival was an uninspiring event attended by bourgeois spectators more interested in socializing than in the music itself. In his later work, he set his sights on a more modest aim. Not for an elevated and general German culture, but a higher non-national culture open to an elite few. Through his writings, Nietzsche aimed to wake up and encourage those who were capable to strive for freedom, affirmation, and greatness. He believed that if he could find suitable readers with ears to hear, then his writing could inspire them to struggle against traditional morality and create great works of culture. Parodying Christ's self-description as a fisher of men, Zarathustra claims, "My very happiness I cast far and wide, between sunrise, noon, and sunset, to see if many human fishes learn to jiggle and wiggle on my happiness. Until, biting on my sharp hidden hooks, they have to emerge into my height, the motliest gorge gudgeons to the most spiteful of all fishers of human fish." Nietzsche's own humor can perhaps be seen as one such hidden hook. Thus, we often see Nietzsche preoccupied with finding the right kind of audience. These preoccupations abound in his prefaces. He begins his preface to the Antichrist by claiming, "This book belongs to the very few. Perhaps none of them are even alive yet. My day won't come until the day after tomorrow. Some people are born posthumously." In the preface of Daybreak, he asks with some trepidation, "But do you not understand me?" and closes with an injunction, "My patient friends, this book desires for itself only perfect readers and philologists. Learn to read me well." Nietzsche places high demand on his ideal audience, and he tries to foster intimacy with them, his patient friends, who may not even be alive yet. Again, in the preface to the genealogy, he places further demands upon his readers. "If this book is unintelligible to anyone and hard on the ears, the fault as I see it does not necessarily lie with me." He presupposes that his readers have knowledge of his earlier writings and that they have not spared some effort in the process, and that these are in fact not easily accessible. He then heightens this demand further. "As far as my Zarathustra is concerned, for example, I count no one as an authority who has not at some time been deeply wounded, and at some time deeply delighted by each of its words, for only then may he enjoy the privilege of reverent participation in the halcyon element out of which the work was born. Nietzsche demands above all a deep emotional involvement with his writings. There is an element of what Nietzsche calls perspectivism here. To engage with Zarathustra properly, he ought to be able to experience each of its words from a painful and wounding perspective, and then be able to shift perspective and reread each word joyfully. Nietzsche invites the reader to get under his skin and participate in the halcyon element out of which he created. The reader must digest his fare and ruminate slowly, attending to the different ways in which he makes them feel. Okay, so this is just returning to like what I was saying like at the beginning of this paper. These sort of egomaniacal philosophers, which I kind of put Nietzsche into, they're like, you have to do things my way. My way is in sort of the right way. You have to like learn what I learned so that you might overcome what I came, and then you see things correctly now. And it's kind of the same crap. Sorry, Nietzsche. It's like, look, you have to do things the way I say, and that way you can like learn what I did, because what I did was smart. I was so smart back then, but you had to do it to understand the smart stuff I'm saying now. So, okay then, Nietzsche. Like, because that's the problem. This is no, that's true. In some sense, it's true. You have to have a background to learn more stuff. But there's more than one way to do things. This is called the genealogical fallacy, where you have to think that there's only one way up. There's not only one way up. There's more than one way up. And so it's not necessarily wrong. You can do things the way Nietzsche says. But that doesn't mean you have to do things the way Nietzsche says. And so this is one of these things that annoy me. And it's nothing against the author right here. The author's probably right about this Nietzsche being worried here. But I find this very, like, again, against the pretentiousness. It's like, you don't, like, but do you not understand me? It's like, this is the me here. Like, this, but do you not understand me? Like, this me in this sentence. It's like, it's a sort of, this is, like, where I'm calling Nietzsche out for the pretentiousness. So. Yeah, and like I said, but you can do things Nietzsche's way, and then you learn you saw what Nietzsche saw, and then you can be smart like Nietzsche, which is good too. Okay. One way in which he attempts to coax out of his ideal reader is by fostering intimacy with them through his sense of humor. Ted Cohen remarks in his book on jokes that joking has the capacity to cultivate the intimacy of a shared sense of community. This seems to be one of the things that Nietzsche tries to achieve with his jokes. Cohen claims that this kind of community has two constituents. The first is a shared set of beliefs, dispositions, prejudices, or points of view of the world, and the second is a shared feeling or response to something. Cohen then claims both of these things can be fostered without jokes, but that jokes can use the second constituent to amplify the first. He notes that we are disappointed when others do not get our jokes, and that when they do, it satisfies a deep human longing, namely to know that we are enough like one another to sense one another and live together. A joke does not compel its conclusion in the way that an argument does. When one person finds a joke amusing and tells it to another, the recipient does not find it funny. It is not necessarily because they do not understand the joke, rather it is because there's some part of them that is unlike the teller. Some aspects of the teller allow them to be amused by the joke, and this aspect is lacking in the recipient. When a joke succeeds and both parties laugh together, there's a shared sense of community. They are similar in some way, and they enjoy a feeling of intimacy. Cohen and Nietzsche are unlikely bedfellows. Cohen's account of jokes is largely egalitarian. For him, when another laughs at my joke, I am reassured that this is something inside me. The something that is tickled by a joke is indeed something that constitutes an element of my humanity. Nietzsche's jokes, on the other hand, are often made at the expense of egalitarian values and are meant to appeal to an ambivalence about them. The community that Nietzsche appeals to is not humanity, but a kind of aristocratic cultural elite. Yeah, so that's a good question. everything universal? Like, are jokes meant to be universally funny, or are jokes meant to only appeal to some people who know some things or have certain tastes? And in some sense, I feel like the author is pointing out that, like, there's a real tension here. Like, what exactly constitutes being funny if sometimes it is about being human, and as Cohen says here, as opposed to Nietzsche, who says it's not about just being human, but it's about being a special sort of human, the ones who understand him. So, yeah. In this way, Nietzsche's jokes are designed to draw in his ideal readers, those who share his taste in a broad sense. He is trying to both foster and to draw out already existing feelings of misgiving against the targets of his jokes. They are meant to resonate with those who, for example, have misgivings about traditional morality in its various forms. His ideal readers will be amused by his barbed remarks about English comfort and herd happiness, and about German drudgery and its unaristocratic valuation of work as an end in itself. His jokes are meant to appeal to those with certain philosophical and aesthetic sensibilities, those sensibilities that he thinks are conducive to greatness. Nietzsche does not envisage his ideal reader as a coterie of like-minded thinkers with ideal views to himself. Rather, he means to inspire those with certain character traits to seek out their own independence. Nietzsche is looking for readers who share that part of himself that finds certain things funny or certain people and views worthy of mockery. Nietzsche's humor tracks the capacity to create great works of culture, because if one shares Nietzsche's sense of humor, then one shares at least some of his values, and sharing Nietzsche's values is, for him, a precondition for producing such works. And yeah, this is exactly what I was kind of getting the sense of. Sharing Nietzsche's values is, for him, a precondition for producing great works of art. So you have to be like Nietzsche to make something great. And this is the genealogical fallacy. You don't have to do things this way, but Nietzsche thinks you can, at least. So, but yeah, this is the sort of thing that worries me. And this is not a criticism. This is a criticism of Nietzsche, and I think the author is good here for pointing this out. Nevertheless, one can of course have ambivalence about slave morality and so enjoy Nietzsche's jokes without having these noble capacities. One thing Cohen's theory does not countenance is our capacity to laugh and joke about ourselves. Nietzsche values this capacity and tries to cultivate it in his readers with humor. He uses jokes to encourage his readers to take a step back from their values and laugh at them. In this way, humor affords a critical distance that can serve as a standpoint from which we can call our values into question. Nietzsche thinks that certain questions about our values are wrongly considered to be off limits, and furthermore that we have been unable to raise questions that he sees as especially pressing. Nietzsche claims to be after knowledge of a kind that has neither existed up to now nor even been desired. He criticizes moral philosophers taking the value of compassion and selflessness for granted and for offering what he sees as a post hoc rationalizations for their prejudices. Well, this is a lot of times what I completely agree with this, what the author just says. A lot of philosophy is post hoc rationalizations. So people, very smart people trying to justify themselves, give apologetics. Schopenhauer, for example, treats the content of morality as immediately obvious before plunging into a lengthy investigation of its grounds. For Nietzsche, this is to set off entirely on the wrong foot. Thus, he proclaims that the value of these values must itself be called into question. He takes this to be virgin territory. Until now, one has not even the slightest doubt or hesitation in ranking the good of higher value than the evil. Given the radically new nature of his project, he claims, I myself had reasons for looking about for learned, bold, and industrious comrades. I am still doing so today. Had he been in the mood, he could have added that he requires comrades with a sense of humor about themselves and their values. By encouraging the reader to laugh at the values, he dispels the reverence that stops them from questioning them and stops them from seeing as questionable. Thus, even if one does not share Nietzsche's aristocratic ideals, it does seem possible to share his laughter, so long as one has the capacity to take a critical step back from one's values. And so this is the question. If you have the capacity to take the critical step back from one's values, Actually, this is the capacity to take a critical step back. In the grand scheme of philosophy, who else is writing around this time? Edmund Husserl is writing a little after Nietzsche. Edmund Husserl said, look, what is phenomenology? It is to be able to take a bracketed view of reality, to take a critical step back and look at the world. Now, Husserl was doing this in terms of logic and science. He wanted a pure scientific view, to take a critical step back and to be able to take a pure view of the world. And so a view of the world without your psychological baggage. And so you're trying to take a critical step back. Now, does laughter do that, and how does it do that? That I find to be a really interesting question, that if this is how laughter operates, if that is the Husserlian epoche, and it was like, we need to like have a compare contrast of Husserlian epoche, the bracketing, and the Nietzschean laughter. But like, these are two very different perspectives on what it is to take a critical step back. I mean, granted, maybe the laughter is how you take a step back from one's values, but Husserl was trying to do this in logic and science, take a critical step back from the world. So the question is, what is this like in the water in Germany at this point? Yeah. But yeah, so this is what I mean. Like, this is the question, like, what exactly is going on? And other people have talked about this too. Alright. One thing that Nietzsche does in the Skirmishes section of Twilight is give it rapid sketches of his aesthetic and philosophical tastes. He offers his opinions and feelings about so many thinkers and artists that one would be hard-pressed to find anyone who agreed with all of them, but that is not the point. Nietzsche is displaying his taste to provide the reader with a self-portrait, telling them his likes and dislikes in order to make an example of himself. He tries to carve out a noble aristocratic taste by disdaining anything he deems common, vulgar, mediocre, or plebeian. He charges the self-portrait with jokes in order to foster intimacy with hypothetical community of others who share his capacity to produce great works. He calls Twilight a declaration of war, and in it he challenges anything that to him remotely smells of ideality or slave morality. The Skirmishes section abounds with barbed jokes meant both to foster certain sensibilities by challenging figures in the history of art and thought, and to resonate with his perhaps unborn ideal readers' already existing sensibilities. The first section of Skirmishes contains a flurry of ad hominem jokes directed at Seneca, Rousseau, Schiller, Dante, Kant, Hugo, Liszt, Sand, Michelet, Carlyle, Mill, and Zola. Nietzsche uses a shotgun tactic to sketch out his aristocratic sensibilities and his antipathy towards modern ideas, bad psychology, pessimism, and romanticism. What kind of sensibilities is Nietzsche trying to appeal to in Section 1 of Skirmishes? For one, a taste for the light, affirmative, aristocratic, and courtly poetry of the provincial troubadour to his successor, Dante, or the hyena who writes poetry in tombs. A taste for Stendhal's psychologist's eye and grasp of the facts, over Zola or the joy of stinking, and more generally the Parisian novelist who cannot put three sentences together without it hurting your eye, the psychologist's eye. Nietzsche also envied Stendhal's sense of humor. He beat me to the best atheism joke, just the sort of thing I would say. God's only excuse is that he doesn't exist. Ha. Stendhal is evidently part of Nietzsche's community of taste, a taste also for Napoleon and Goethe's return to nature over Rousseau's. Goethe returned to nature by coming toward the naturalness of the Renaissance, a high, free, even terrible natural and naturalness, whereas Rousseau wanted to return to the supposed original equality of nature. Accordingly, Nietzsche equips Rousseau or the return to nature in impurus naturalibus, or in natural dirtiness. Finally, a taste for his own withholding and easily misunderstood style, full of detours, ambiguities, masks, and misdirection, to John Stuart Mill's insulting clarity. In this way, Nietzsche tries to root out and perhaps create his ideal reader by drafting a standard of taste. And he tries to win readers over to his standard by fostering intimacy through his sense of humor. In Cohen's terms, Nietzsche's jokes create a shared feeling of amusement that serves to amplify the reader's existing beliefs or prejudices against the joke's target. It also seems true that a well-placed joke can kindle a belief where none existed before, or amplify an unconscious prejudice into a firmly held and conscious distaste. This last sentence is interesting here. Like, why is it there is one question. Because it seems like this conclusion right here. In Cohen's terms, Nietzsche's jokes create a shared feeling of amusement that serves to amplify the reader's existing beliefs or prejudice against the joke's target. That's the point. Nietzsche's trying to find these people and amplify the stuff. And it also seems that a well-placed joke can kindle a belief where none had existed before, or amplify an unconscious prejudice into a firmly held and conscious distaste. So it's in some sense, what is going on here with like a rapid fire sort of presentation of like criticisms? It's like, well, okay, this one. You might start to like say, well, Nietzsche has a general point here, but like that's amplifying a reader's existing beliefs. The question is, can it kindle a belief where none existed before? Or is there something else to it? And this is a well-placed joke. But is that any different from a well-placed anything else? You know? I don't know. But see, that's the question. What exactly is... I think this is right. But what is a well-placed anything as opposed to a well-placed joke? Like a well-placed criticism. You're like, well, shoot, I'd never thought of that before. And so that's a well-placed criticism. Now all of a sudden you kindle a belief. Now a well-placed joke can also work that way. But what is it about those two things that are doing such work? So how much space? Okay, this is the last paragraph. Nietzsche's humor makes up an important part of his attempt to engage his readers' affects. I've considered a number of different, often interrelated uses to which he puts it. First, he uses it to dislodge thick beliefs that agents would be reluctant to give up in the face of sober argument alone. Second, Nietzsche thinks that we have inherited an unconscious reverence toward traditional morality and traditional institutions that hinders from seeing them as objects of possible criticism. His humor provides a counterbalance to this reverence and affords an emotional distance from which we can scrutinize things previously held to be off limits. Third, Nietzsche uses humor to cement his points on an affective level. Nietzsche saw his critique as urgent, and so he pulls no punches in attempting to convince his readers of its urgency. He often uses humorous ad hominem arguments in order to do this. Fourth, Nietzsche exploits humor's social dimension in order to foster intimacy with his readers. He uses humor to seek out people who share his values, and consequently people who have the capacity for greatness, to draw them closer to his side and to put more distance between them and slave morality. The way in which Nietzsche affects us is often challenging and confrontational, and the same can be said for his jokes. He tests our integrity by calling us to reckon with our deepest feelings in our attempt to inquire into ourselves and our values. Since most of his readers are inheritors of slave morality, his sallies against it can be provocative and unsettling. By making the reader look at the ways in which they are attracted and repelled by certain values, he fosters the capacity to postpone judgment and to look at the matter under inquiry from multiple sides. Nietzsche prescribes the relentless self-scrutiny of one's feeling, and the critical distance afforded by laughter and humor can enable the reader to engage in that self-scrutiny. Okay, so, yeah. This is $1.45 to read this paper. So this took a little bit. Okay, I was just looking at the notes. The notes are short. Yeah, okay. And so this, in footnote 3 it says, I do not mean to assume the truth of the incongruity theory of humor. So the author is well understands the that there is literature on this, merely that we often find incongruous things amusing. And Nietzsche knows this too. Interesting. Okay. So it's not just that Nietzsche is assuming an incongruity theory. So that's an important footnote right there. Okay. Anybody have any questions about this now that we've got through this rather dense paper? It goes on and on and on, which is fine. But it's just like, yeah. Okay. So here's what we did. In section 1, we reject interpretations of Nietzsche's humor on which he engages in self-parody. Part 2, humor is laughter's critical tool. And 3, exploits humor's social dimension in order to find out how it works. Okay. You know, in some sense, I think this is fair. I think this author actually I tend to think this is like kind of what Nietzsche thinks he might be up to. And so, like, I think this is not a, oh, how do you like that? I just got a gifted sub to somebody else. I wonder how that happened. Interesting. What's my verdict on the paper? You know, it's interesting. People have asked me for this before. Like, can I give like it a 1 to 10? Yeah, I think it. The problem is I don't know enough of the literature, like in Nietzsche studies, to actually tell you if these are legit beefs that the authors picked out. Now, I think I know, I understand, like, but like, this is a question. I have trouble giving like hard and fast like recommendations or stuff because I don't know enough of the background. What I can tell you is, yeah, I like the author's argument here that they show that Nietzsche is not making fun of himself. Nietzsche is maybe criticizing his younger self for making mistakes, but then showing that you kind of need to understand the mistakes to go to where Nietzsche is now. And then that, in some sense, is also an implicit criticism of the literature that was sort of looking at Nietzsche's younger self as something to be mocked. Clearly, Nietzsche was not mocking his younger self because you needed to understand Nietzsche's younger self to understand where Nietzsche had gotten himself to. And so I think the author is right. And I think that it follows the general pattern of a lot of these philosophers who write this way, where they had certain ideas that they strongly held, and then they sort of like moved on from them. But the important part is for them to understand where they got. It's important to see where they were. And so I think the criticism of the other authors that shows Nietzsche was just merely making fun of himself, I think that's probably right. So I think the author is correct in that. That would be this part 1. Then the question is in part 2, you look at how Nietzsche uses humor as laughter as a critical tool in his polemic against traditional morality. That's an engineering problem, actually. Is this how Nietzsche works? Yeah, probably, at least in some sense. And the question is, did Nietzsche engineer what Nietzsche wanted to, which was criticism of the other philosophers? And you could say, well, just however much extent, Kant can just be made fun of for being a civil servant philosopher, and how much Mill can be made fun of for being English. The utilitarians can be just made fun of for being English. In some sense, does that work? How hard does that actually land? It lands somewhere. There's something to time and place in philosophy, and that people are reflecting their own culture, and maybe it isn't as universal as they want. So it's like, yes, does the parody always land? No. Does Nietzsche think it lands? Yes. And that's kind of why you have to go over it a lot. You have to make a lot of jokes because not all of them are going to land. And that's sort of the same thing at the end. You're trying to draw people in. Not everything you're going to say is going to land. Like a stand-up comic, not all the jokes are going to work. You have to sort of try to see which ones do. So I think it's a good paper. Yeah. So I like that. Basically, I like the first half more than the second half, is my judgment on this. The second half, I could take it or leave it, because like I said, I find this sort of I find it a little pretentious, even of Nietzsche saying, well, look, you have to know me to understand where I am now, and if you want to be this smart, you have to know what I did. It's like, no, there's other ways to do stuff, but if you want to know what Nietzsche knows exactly as Nietzsche knows it, you do have to kind of go back over his work. So I'm less happy with Nietzsche's second half. That's not a criticism of the author. I think the author did a good job showing it. So I hope that answers your question, Valpo. I don't know. Sharing Nietzsche's values is for him a precondition for producing such works. And so this is sort of the problem. Now, this is a good question, the capacity to take a critical step back. I would like to see some context on what it is to take a philosophical critical step back. That a laughter might indicate this is an interesting point. But how that actually happens is kind of unexplained. And that's not a criticism not a direct criticism of the author. It might be a criticism of Nietzsche. For Nietzsche, not looking very hard at how laughter actually phenomenologically works. Aristotle, you're lurking. I'm super tired. I'll probably fall asleep. Love you. Oh, Aristotle, we were talking about you earlier because there were thick ideas like THICC ideas. You should probably like. So all your ideas are thick because you're a thotty. So cool. Yeah. Anyone else have questions? But thank you, Aristotle. Should like shoot. There we go. Check out Aristotle for everyone who likes philosophical content. So, yeah. Thick ideas. Yeah. You would get behind that, wouldn't you? Get behind it. And I was going to say something else and I stopped myself because it was definitely inappropriate. Should just have said it, though. Yeah, can ideas be bent over? Yeah, see, and how many people would laugh at the joke? Yep. So, I read it, yeah. Well, I'm happy to see that, and in the Nietzschean sense, we both got the joke. And so there's something that would separate us from people who did not get the joke. And then that would make us feel special. Actually, now that I just said that, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because they could also mean you're an idiot. Just because you both got a joke, maybe you were both idiots. Not like aristocratic super people, but like just morons because we like the same stuff. That's the other thing. The arrogance to think you're like going to do some great work of art. Dumb but a fat ass, I'm cool with that.